So I invite Professor M.D. NALAPAT and Ms. Anushree Suresh onto the dais. Ms. Anushree Suresh is a postgraduate in Political Science and International Relations from Goa University and a participant of Genesis 2019 program supported by the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Japan. I'm handing over the proceedings to Ms. Anushree. Please take over. Thank you.
Thank you for the warm welcome. Good day to all dignitaries present here. India and Japan have a long history of friendship and partnership of 1,400 years, and they continue to be the beneficiaries of the partnership stemming from this ancient alliance bolstered by the ideals of democracy, rule of law, and individual liberty. Today, at the second edition of the International Conference on India-Japan Relations, organized by Center for Public Policy Research, with the support of Consulate General of Japan in Chennai, we will be delving into crucial questions of geostrategic, geopolitical, and economic significance of the India-Japan Indo-Pacific nexus. Professor NALAPAT, it's a great honor to have you here with us to kickstart this crucial discussion on the India-Japan Indo-Pacific nexus. So as we formally enter into the 2 days of in-depth deliberation, could you please share your views on the question of Indo-Pacific, India-Japan strategic and global partnership, especially at the face of the securitization of the Indo-Pacific region due to the Taipei-Beijing axis, and how the region has emerged as a strategic common vantage point for the Indo-Japanese interests?
Thank you, Anushree. I'm delighted to be here, and thank you very much for giving me this opportunity. I'd only like to say that one of the problems that we face is that we do not really escape our past, even in situations where it's very, very important to understand that it's a completely new situation in the present, and it's going to be an even newer situation in the future. So there are instances in which that overhang of the past continues in our minds. It affects our policies, it affects our way of thinking, and as a consequence, we work out policies, we work out approaches, we come up with mindsets that are less than optimal to face the challenges not only of the present, but more importantly of the future. Now, that's where I raised these issues, this slightly radioactive concepts of Cold War 1.0 and Cold War 2.0, because many individuals are, and I would say thank God for that, idealistic. They don't want to see conflicts. They want to see harmony among human beings. And you know that the G20 theme of India for this year of our presidency is Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam. But Anushree, if I may say, that particular phrase comes from the Hitopadesa. And that was, I think, if I remember, that was a long time ago that I came across it. I think it was a deer, it was a fox, and it was a crow. And a conversation between them. And the fox wanted to persuade the deer to come back to its lair so that the fox could have a good dinner. And the crow was warning the deer, watch out, this chap is up to no good, don't follow him. Then the fox said, Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam, we are all one family, I am also your family, why don't you come? But of course, finally the deer listened to the crow and did not go. My point is very simple. We have to understand there are some negative impulses and the positive impulses. And sometimes in our desire for harmony, we may neglect the negative impulses and we may basically give them a lot of liberty. And if that happens, they become more powerful and ultimately we have a bigger problem dealing with them. It's like an epidemic. SARS-1 was able to be cured reasonably well because after a few days of hesitation, the government in China came up with a lot of the facts, not all the facts, that's it's not possible. But in SARS-2, till today, the facts have not yet officially come out. Even something as obvious as the fact that it was a lab leak was covered up. And I'm sorry to say, it is not only a Chinese who covered it up, it was very different people who covered it up. Frankly, I have contacted 7 or 8 epidemiologists from different parts of the world, and all of them privately told me that, look, this is a lab leak, but we can't say it, because if we say it, in our profession, we will be considered to be not sound. And the worst thing you can say about a scholar is that he or she is not sound. So the truth was hidden. It's like Galileo saying that, the earth goes around the sun. But that truth was hidden. If poor Galileo had to say, no, the sun goes around the earth. So the point is, in this era, it's very important for us to understand the needs of the present, the threats of the present, and not live in a fantasy world where a fox can become a vegetarian. Let's put it that way. Or a fox is not interested in the deer. Put it that way. There are foxes, there are deers, and there are crows in the universe. So we have to be very careful, even when we are talking about harmony, of ensuring that those forces that are negative, those forces that are inimical to harmony, don't get the liberty needed for them to grow and overpower us. We have an example in the 1930s in Europe, in which certain forces were active. And as a consequence, the world tried very hard to come to terms, the major figures of that period, and gave the benefit of the doubt, keep on giving the benefit of the doubt, even when horrible things were taking place. Ultimately, a huge price was paid. Nearly 60 million people died in World War II as a consequence of the world. About 3 or 4 years earlier, if the world had reacted, it would have been a different situation. Maybe it would have been 600,000. Any death is horrible, but 600,000 would be a better result than 60 million. So I only want to say, Anushree, that we have to be real about this world. We have to understand the opportunities and the threats. And we have to forget the overhang of the past. Forget Cold War 1.0. That era is gone. Unfortunately, we find in some parts of the world it's being recreated. In Europe, again, they are trying to recreate the ghost of Cold War 1.0. A ghost is a ghost. It can never come back to life. But the reality is, we have to understand the present in order not to forfeit the future. And that is where the India-Japan relationship comes in. It has to understand the realities of today, the threats of today, and not keep getting tugged back with memories of the past.
So, like you had just mentioned, so this region is growing a lot of importance and probably coming from the lot of understanding of the past and the present and how the future will be. So countries from the region and across the world are developing new policies to strengthen their reach in the region, and especially due to its pertinence when it comes to shipping, trade, and all those aspects. So we see that Japan has a security diamond policy and India's Act East policy, which kind of shows the serious effort by the two countries to break the silence about the challenges emerging from the region, especially when it in terms of freedom of navigation and deterring the changes in the status quo, and actively participating in the defense of the freedom of all countries to utilize the waters of Indo-Pacific for the benefit of all. So we are looking at the region of Indo-Pacific as an epicenter of diverse geo-economic and geopolitical importance. And how do you think, what are the synergies in the Indo-Pacific strategies of India, Japan, and ASEAN triangularity?
Look, I'd like to say that in my view, the India-Japan relationship is a very mature relationship. And we saw that in an event that took place on February 24th, 2022, in which Russian forces directly attacked Ukrainian territory. There's no question about it. But India took a very clear stand based on what it believed were the needs of India and, frankly, the century, the Indo-Pacific century. It did not want a diversion to another century. And it took a clear stand, for example, in not cutting itself off from half the land area of Europe and half the land area of Asia, which is the Russian Federation. Russia may not be great in terms of dollar terms GDP, but it's a superpower in terms of gross national resources, GNR. And if you cut yourself off from that, you are chopping off a foot in a very important relay race. So the Japanese were very understanding of India. The French, for example, and Holmes, who's really probably one of the finest analysts in the country in all these matters, although he is, the problem is he doesn't write very much, so unless you know him personally, you may not get the benefit of his wisdom. But the reality of the situation is that the Japanese, even in terms of petroproducts, now there is a Sakhalin field. India and Japan had a partnership in one of the Sakhalin fields. And the Japanese very correctly said that, look, if we leave this partnership, it will affect our relationship with India. We want a good relationship with India, so sorry, we are going to continue in the Sakhalin field. I think that was a very wise decision. And it's testimony of, if I may say so, the legacy of Abe-san, who, was completely and totally and passionately, as in the case of Prime Minister Modi, interested in a very strong relationship. So the Japanese behaved in a very different way from some other countries where India's stand on that particular conflict was. Our interest is Asia. Our interest is China. It's not Europe. That is the past. Europe is our past. And let me assure you, Anushree, neither your generation nor even my generation, we don't have any ill feeling at all towards the Western world. That's long past. In fact, I would say that there are almost everybody in this room will have some relative who is a citizen of some Western country. We are the best of friends. So that past is over. It's done with. We remember it only as a history and not as a mode of planning action in the future. So in the same way, fortunately, in the case of India, the reaction in February, March, April, May, June was different from July. And that reaction was, now people are very understanding of the initial Indian position on Ukraine. But I'd like to say the Japanese position was understanding from the very beginning. And why? Because Japan is there in the Indo-Pacific. Japan, quite frankly, you're talking about Taiwan. You're talking about this problem between China and Taiwan. God forbid if Taiwan falls to the control of China, the country most threatened will be Japan. Its defenses will be severely affected. So Taiwanese are important for Japanese security. Japanese security is important for South Korean security. South Korean for Malaysian and Indonesia. They for Vietnamese. Then for Myanmar, India. The whole chain will be affected if Taiwan is disrupted. I think the Japanese understand that extremely well, which is why you have a very close interaction between Taiwan and Japan. And since I'm here, I'd like to just end my longish answer by one point. I am very keen on an India-Japan-Taiwan tech partnership. I am very keen on software development parks, on chip manufacturing facilities between India, Taiwan, and Japan. 3 countries working together. 3 companies, 3 research institutes working together. And I think that is the way in which we can ensure that the world is better prepared to face the shocks of the future. Japan, as I said again, understood the difficulties of India. As in 1998, when the nuclear explosion took place, France understood the difficulties of India. I think it was Jacques Chirac who was the president. And India still remembers France with gratitude. Believe me, I must tell our Japanese friends, we are not people who are friendly with somebody and then suddenly we forget that person. We are like you, people who have long memories. And having long memories, the good deeds that you have done for us we will remember for a long time, and the good deeds we have done for you, we know you will also remember.
Thank you, sir. That's a very interesting perspective. So, as we're discussing the security and defense aspects of the Indo-Pacific, we have seen that due to increasingly being hemmed in by China's maritime expansion, we have seen that Japan has gone from a desecuritized player to building military strategy of hedging through the partnership with India and other bodies. So, what do you think is the role of India-Japan security cooperation in the region in building a very favorable regional environment as well as expanding the security prospects in the region?
Anushree, I think someday you should come to Manipal and maybe you should settle down there. You're asking some pretty good questions. I'll try not to reveal my ignorance. I may not succeed. I've got some students here. I've got some former colleagues here, so I'll have to be careful. But let me say that this is the world of grey, or it's a world of multi-chrome. It's not a world of black and white. It's a world of in between. It's a world of different colors. If you have a rifle and you're using it to defend a family, it's different from a rifle used to kill innocent people. So the same rifle has different uses. I would like to distinguish between offensive deployment and defensive deployment. Where there was a time when it was possibly, offensive deployment. But that is not the case anymore. Today, whether it is Japan or whether it is India, our deployment is essentially defensive. Not just defending our territorial boundaries, because in the world of today, in kinetic issues, and I'm sure there are friends here from the Navy and from other forces, they will confirm that, it's an age of hybrid warfare. Warfare can be through the internet, it can be through societal influences, using the internet in other ways, it can be through agriculture, it can be through health. You've seen the COVID pandemic. I mean, it's a hybrid thing. And from that point of view, it's very, very important to understand the difference between a defensive and an offensive posture. In my view, the Japanese and the Indian postures are completely defensive. And if a country is calling them offensive, it means that is a country that is looking at doing an offensive against India and Japan. If I enter a house and I see somebody at the gate, it's in a slightly high-risk zone with a gun guarding that gate, I'm not going to feel nervous. Why would I feel nervous at all? I would be very happy that my friends have got that protection. But if I were wanting to go inside and do some harm to the family, I would not like the fact of a sentry guarding the gate. So frankly, when people misconstrue the Japanese and the Indian deployment, the Japanese and the Indian involvement in Quad, the Japanese and the Indian coming together of defensive kinetic and non-kinetic systems, one begins to wonder what the intention is of this individual who's walking into the house if he objects to a guard guarding that house. Because the role of a guard is different from the role of an aggressor. And in my view, the role of Japan, the role of India is as the guards of a stable, secure Indo-Pacific order. It is by no way an aggressor role.
Thank you, sir. So, if you start looking at the non-security aspects as a core element of the Indo-Japan, Indo-Pacific strategy, so we can see that it's founded on the aspect of identifying and expanding certain cross-cutting sectors that allow Tokyo as well as New Delhi to advance in the economic opportunities the region provides. So the two countries are focusing on areas like technology, logistics, shipping industry and all those things. So Japan, following the Second World War, has developed a world-leading commercial shipbuilding industry and as well as a fisheries sector. And India has had a rich history of being a pioneer of shipping industry. So we are looking at the Indo-Japan partnership in terms of building a maritime ecosystem, trade ecosystem, that built around ships, ports, logistics, and technology sharing. So, what do you think are the prospects for the Indo-Japan relations as well as for the region?
Anushree, let me say that I am a professor of peace. I want peace. Even in the case of a particular country with which I have been for a long time, it was only over the last, I would say, 2016 onwards that I came to realize that it is not going to be possible for that country to, in its current political dispensation, to believe that there should be peace with India, rather that India should be in pieces. So I lost hope around that period. But I've always been promoting peace, and I think peace is a much healthier order than war. Having said that, I'd like to say that security is a very important component of every activity of human life. It's like the human oxygen. It's the oxygen of the body, security in the body politic, the body economic, the body society. And I'm sorry to say, whether it's in Japan or whether it's in India, whether it's in the public sector or the private sector, I think we are not understanding of the need to provide that oxygen of security. And for short-term purposes, we allow the carbon monoxide of insecurity to enter our bloodstream. In the case of Japan, I'll tell you. I mean, as I said, our Japanese friends are expert. There are others here who are studying Japan who are really expert. Shipbuilding. Today, Japan is one of the biggest buyers of Chinese ships. Now, if Japan and India were to enter into a genuine shipbuilding partnership, in which fabrication in large part is also done here, technology is done here, and this to and fro movement. Indians can go to Japan, work on yards there, Japanese can come here, and in my view, in the age of technology, seamless to and fro movement is very important. Now, in the case of Taiwan, for example, I have been very interested in a good India-Taiwan tech partnership. I have been interested in this for decades, not just years. But the difficulty is, actually, on our side, we are basically saying that, all right, if you want a free trade agreement, let the Americans sign a free trade agreement first with Taiwan. The fact is, de facto, they have a free trade agreement with Taiwan. The highest duty on a Taiwanese product in America is less than 5%. So it's de facto free trade. So the point is that you need a de facto free trade system for seamless flow of manpower and material to go across boundaries in tech cooperation. In shipbuilding cooperation also, you'll need that seamless cooperation. You'll need, for example, instead of Chinese workers, Indian workers, in my view, are very different from a Japanese point of view than workers, let's say, from China. So that kind of seamless cooperation would enable ships to be made in Japan at maybe 20% less price. And today, Japanese shipbuilding is suffering because, and Chinese shipbuilding is booming because of a 10% price differential. I mean, I may be wrong on some of the figures. It may be 12%, it may be 15%, I don't know, but the rough guess I came was about 10-11%. For that 10-11%, Japanese ship owners are buying Chinese. Now, heaven knows in the modern world of electronics what is there. Heaven knows the questions of maintenance, etc. involved. We don't know. So the question is, wouldn't it make more sense to have a seamless interflow between India and Japan so that we jointly produce chips and ships that are much cheaper than Chinese-made ships? And we replace China in global markets. We are already seeing that in the case of Suzuki. Suzuki came into India, and I congratulate, Mr. Suzuki for having recognized the potential of India long before anybody else in the world did. And today Suzuki is exporting to 128 countries from India. Suzuki sells more cars in India than it sells in Japan. Suzuki is an example. Shipbuilding could be another example. Aircraft construction could be another example. There are so many examples that could take place, but for that you need a 2023 mindset, not a 1993 mindset. And I think in both sides, in India as well as in Japan, I am a little dismayed at the fact that in 2023, I am still meeting people of 1993 mindsets who are framing policy for 2028.
Thank you, sir, for providing valuable insights into the Indo-Japan, Indo-Pacific construct in the Indo-Japan relations. And now I would like to open the stage for the audience. If anyone wants to ask any question, please go ahead. Anyone would like to go?
Nice listening to you. I'm a professor from QSAT, School of Marine Science. I'm actually very much a pro-science person, and very heartening to listen that you said atomic energy or creating nuclear power plants are going to be a viable issue to produce cheap energy, which is definitely going to reduce a lot of poverty. I'm very happy about it. I just wanted to know, we do have some collaboration with Japan. Yesterday, one professor from Niigata University was here. I was there a couple of weeks back. I was there. We sent the students that side and this side. So it's very active cooperation we have. And we also have a project funded by JSPS to study the leakage at the Fukushima power plant and some natural radiation on domestic animals. That project was funded, but due to COVID, the actual field visits couldn't happen. I just wanted to know whether Japan is now still interested in building more power plants, nuclear power plants. That is one thing which I wanted to know, because I do believe, because many European countries have maximum power coming from nuclear power plants, and which is a very key thing, and we must have. That's what my feeling. But what is the experience which Japan had during the Fukushima or the tsunami affected events, whether they still have that plan to build more nuclear power plants and produce cheap energy?
You know, despite my admiration for the Japanese, I have always been an Indian citizen all my life. So what the Japanese plans are, I'm not entirely sure that I would be the best person to answer that, but I agree with you. In my personal view, nuclear energy is a field in which both sides should really cooperate on. There's no question about it. And chip manufacture also is a field where we should cooperate on. And I would again emphasize the point, let's have coalitions of the same, coalitions of friendly countries, coalitions of companies and countries that are not going to fight each other tomorrow. Because don't forget, artificial intelligence, and I think it's important for India and Japan to work very hard at AI and at cyber threats, and frankly at ensuring that cyber capability against threats is also built up. This is basically going to be the stuff of what modern warfare is all about. It will essentially be paralyzing a country without a single soldier entering the country. You may have drones entering, but you may not have a single manned aircraft or a single soldier entering the country, but you can paralyze the entire country. And may I point out one thing, sir, if I may say so. Again, you know, we've been doing some research, and I would like to acknowledge the immense help I've got from my colleagues in the Department of Geopolitics in Manipal. I think a tremendous amount of help I've got from them. You know, there has been involvement of external actors in India and the United States. I mean, what was studied was India and the United States. You know that one of the problems of the online age is that we basically, just as we visit friends whom we like to visit, we avoid meeting people whom we don't like to visit. We go into those websites whose opinions we generally agree with. And we avoid websites whose opinions we don't agree with. The consequence is that we burrow deeper and deeper into our own prejudices where internet surfing is concerned. And we become more and more, more and more convinced of our prejudices. And we don't look into an alternative point of view. Now, I made it a point to be part of groups that are completely opposed to each other. to be sampling websites that are totally opposed to each other. Now, the Ukraine war is an example. It's an alternate universe. You look at the war from CNN point of view, look at it from RT point of view, look at it from CGTN point of view, look at it from BBC point of view, entirely different wars. Completely different wars. China Daily or New York Times, totally different wars. So this alternate reality is what is happening, and I think it's important. I'm very sure Japan is also a target of this kind of a malicious effort to widen social divisions in Japan. It's a very major democracy. And if I may say so, the Japanese and Indians started around the same time in being a democracy, and both have remained democracies continuously in a very, since that period. So I'd only like to say that I think it's very important for us to understand that threats are there in a lot more than soldiers coming across the frontier or naval ships or aircraft or rockets. The threats can be there implanted in our minds. And that implanting can take place without our even knowing it. For example, the gaming industry. According to some estimates that I have seen, 78% of the beneficial ownership of the gaming industry is owned by investors in a particular country. If you look at TikTok in America and the social impact of TikTok in America and TikTok in China and the social impact of TikTok in China, you'll understand why Prime Minister Modi was the first world leader to ban TikTok in India in 2020, if I recall. So these are threats that are there, and if we assume that the fox is not a dangerous at all, that we are the deer and we believe the fox is not dangerous and we don't listen to the wise advice of the crow, we are going to be in trouble. So I think on all these issues, the security of Japan is security of India. Security of India is security of Japan. And I think that kind of a perception has to come about, and one way of coming about will be technological cooperation. And my last point, in the US and India, this cooperation has not come G to G. It's come from the ground up. It's come from Indians going there, Americans coming here, the Green Revolution, for example. I'd still like to acknowledge the immense role played by about 2 or 3 dozen American agronomists. They did amazing work in ensuring that from a country of famine, we became a country of surplus. But that is from the ground up. And that situation has taken place in India and Japan as well. But there are still severe institutional limitations to that kind of ground up interaction between India and Japan. And we have seen in the case of Europe, when you are putting barriers to sensible ground up interaction, when, for example, you're putting barriers to a techie from Chennai or Hyderabad coming there, what you get, a lot of people finally come in who are not got technical skills, who are not contributing to taxes, and who are, not in a sense, easy to assimilate in a way that a techie from Chennai or Hyderabad would have been. So I think it's very important for governments in all countries, especially the democracies that are fighting authoritarian impulses, to ensure that we think in 2023 minds about 2023, 2028 needs and not be anchored to a past. Because if you fall into the water with an anchor tied to you, you're not going to have a very happy time of it.
Professor Nalapat, it's been a big honor to listen to you. I've been working in India-Japan field for the last few years now, 2008. My question to you, sir, is linked to what you replied. What I would like to ask you, sir, is that you talked about chips to ships between India and Taiwan. That's a very catchy phrase you gave. Sir, I would like to know, how do we instill more confidence in the Japanese SMEs to come to India? Because you talked about ground up thing. Suzuki is a good example, but when I work in Japan and I work with Japanese companies, it is a slightly scary proposition to come to India and do business from India. The G2G relations is great, but if you look at the numbers, sir, of SME exchange between Japan and India and then compare it to Japan and China and Japan to Vietnam, our relations are very, very underwhelming, sir. So my question to you, sir, as a scholar in this field is, guide us. How do we make it happen for more SME exchange between Japan and India? Thank you, sir.
Yeah, I'd like to say that it's a very important question that you've raised, and as you correctly said, it's not today. It is far below the potential. I'd like to say that the kind of fears that you had were similar to what the Koreans had when they started looking at India in the 1980s. But the Korean companies came in large numbers and they remained here. And I think one mistake the Koreans did not make, which I think both the Taiwanese and the Japanese probably made, is that senior people did not visit India in the beginning. They sent their junior people. The junior people understood the situation. They understood how to ensure that a hotel room is kept open for the chairman. When the chairman arrives at 2 o'clock in the morning after a horrible flight, and a car is ready for the chairman at the airport, when there are about 500 taxis clustering around and 400 taxi drivers trying for his attention. So then the chairman came and it was a much more comfortable visit. I am told of horror stories by Taiwanese, Japanese, these two definitely senior officials coming, landing into an airport, being besieged by taxi drivers, finally fighting them off, jumping into some car, getting into a hotel after getting lost, and then finding out at the hotel that you have to sit in the lobby till about 10 o'clock in the morning, and because there's no room for you until 10 o'clock in the morning. And they went straight back and said, we are never going to invest 1 yen or 1 Taiwanese dollar in this country. Well, frankly, let's be honest, no gain without pain. And the reality is, if you look at the manpower wealth in India, you can say that yes, they're not ready when they're coming out of universities. But they're coming out in their millions, in their tens of millions. And many of them, you give them 6 years, not 6 years. 6 years are for the regular training. You give them 6 months to 18 months of on-the-job training at a very low stipend. And then you'll find they're absolutely first class. And the salary in India will be still much more competitive than a salary even in China. Much more competitive than China. And the talent base will be much more in India than is the case in China. So my feeling is that you have to look a little bit like a long distance runner. Everything is not a 100-yard sprint. It can be a 400-meter relay, it can be a 2,000-meter relay, it can be a marathon, but train yourself to look at least to the 2,000-meter relay. Don't expect everything to be a 100-yard sprint, because frankly, India is a difficult place to basically deal. It's complex, it's myriad, and it takes a little bit of time. It takes a little bit of effort. So let your young people come here. Send more people to study here. Send some Japanese researchers to work at the CPPR, for example, and get some CPPR people to work there. So there is much more seeding of that kind of activity. And then you'll find this is not just a market, but it's a human resource source that if Japan misses, Japan is going to have severe problems in maintaining its position in the global economy. This is what I'd like to say. I'm stating mainly for the Japanese point of view, because I think it's very important that the Japanese understand the potential of the Indian market. And I'm very happy about one thing, young man, very happy about that. 15 years ago, it would be very difficult to see an Indian anywhere in a Japanese company, in Japan or anywhere. American companies, everywhere. I mean, one of our alumni is the head of Microsoft, Satya Nadella. Other alumni are heads of various other institutions. But in Japan, that was not possible. These days, a larger and larger number of Indians are having senior positions, not in India, but in Japan and in other parts of the world. And I think that's a very welcome sign that the Japanese policymakers of today, and I'd like to again compliment, Abe-san, I think this entire transformation of the Japanese outlook came during Abe-san's time, a truly transformational leader. I think our Japanese friends are also getting into that. So I wouldn't advise you to be too pessimistic. I think the skies are clearing where India-Japan relations are concerned on the economic front.
Thank you, sir. Due to time constraint, we have to end this conversation for now. But we will be continuing our dialogue on various issues such as defense, technology, and maritime cooperation in the following coming sessions, where we will be using this cooperation to see the potential, to harness the full potential of Indo-Pacific region. So I think, sir, this conversation underscored the need for a continued dialogue to promote peace, prosperity, and security in this region through geopolitical, geoeconomic conversations. And something I would be taking back from this conversation is like, how to reanalyze Indo-Japan policies from a futuristic perspective while understanding the history of all these relationships as well. Thank you so much, sir, for setting the tone for the conference.
Anishri, one last word. I'm sure I'm not going to hear the last of you. I'm sure that in the days to come, you're going to come out with papers, you're going to come out with discoveries as your other colleagues here.
Sure.
And I'm very happy to be here, because this is the world of the future. And it's always good for us to remind ourselves that the most important dimension is the future. Thank you so much for your courtesy and for your understanding, although I'm not sure I should thank you for those very tough questions of yours. Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir.